Good news, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Business in the Know. Jesse Bodony from Uni Esports joins us today because my co-host Paul Benton is pretty good at finding guests that are even able to teach me stuff. A guy who generally knows everything about everything. I know very little about this. Paul, welcome, and please introduce Jesse and tell us a little bit about what's in store for us today.
Hey, good morning, Mike. Jesse, welcome to the show. We're delighted to have you here. You are an expert at esports, a phenomenon that is hit campuses. It is a growing sport. It is taking campuses and businesses by storm. I even know of media companies that own esports teams. And we're hoping you can educate our audience, and I'll be the first to plead ignorance. What is this industry? And we're so glad because you are the CEO of a San Francisco-based consultancy. You work with colleges and universities around the country in advising them on how to set up their esports program. But you're not only a business consultant, you are also a gamer.
Yep.
And so we have a lot to learn today. So welcome, and shall we begin?
Yeah. Happy to be here. Thanks for bringing me on, Paul. Happy to be here with you, Mike. And yeah, let's dive into it. Happy to share whatever I can share.
So tell us just I'm 4 years old. What are esports? And when did they begin to become an industry and a sport on campus?
Yeah, so esports, and this is actually a kind of a common misconception, but esports and gaming, video games, are not exactly the same thing. So video games is the massive sort of umbrella term or concept that encompasses everything from casual games to mobile games like Angry Birds on your phone to the most competitive games. Esports is a subsection of gaming that's really focused on the competitive. The best way to think about what esports is just to think about basically what sports are. In almost every important way, esports mirror sports, traditional athletics in their form. And you get sort of the same industry, the same idea. It's you got the players, the professional teams, the coaches, the scholarships, the leagues, the governance bodies, the viewership, the fanfare, the industry around it. All of that is what makes esports. And yeah, it's really starting to blow up, at least in the mainstream. Competitive video gaming has been around since, I could learn to play a video game. So, 40, 50 years probably, but don't quote me on that. But only recently has it really sort of caught on as something that's being acknowledged in mainstream culture as something that's here, that's legitimate, and that entrepreneurs and anyone should, pay attention to, because there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of positive that can come from gaming. And where my work sort of touches down is really in the scholastic space. I work at the collegiate level primarily, and my work is just sort of focused around bringing opportunities to gamers. I think there's a pretty remarkable stat from Pew Research, which is 97% of kids aged 12 through 17 play video games. So it's just where kids these days are at. Everyone plays video games, if not esports. And so it's imperative that, whether you're at the K-12 level or at the collegiate level, that you have some sort of formal infrastructure to support students in their passion for gaming, be it casual or competitive.
Jesse, how many colleges and universities are now participating with such an infrastructure?
So right now there's roughly 350 schools. We're sort of at the beginning of that steepening adoption curve. It was really novel in collegiate about 2-3 years ago. Now more and more are picking up on the trend, more building programs. And there's really the entire spectrum. You have schools that have very casual, not really capitalized programs that are more of a recreational or intramural club status. Maybe it's student run, all the way to, $5 million arenas, full ride scholarships, dedicated coaches, the whole thing. So yeah, 350 schools approximately, and really all kinds of programs from 2 years to 4 years. You see quite a bit. Yeah.
So help us understand, what does an arena or the infrastructure look like? It's more than just a laptop, isn't it? I mean, these are buildings. Can you just help us understand what I remember way back from my college days, there would be the athletic center, which might be 75,000 square feet or something, with an Olympic-sized pool and weights, locker room, tennis courts, what have you.
Mm-hmm.
What are we seeing in an esports facility? What is that analog?
So an esports arena that is meant to sort of house professional play. It's basically like a basketball arena. You have seats and viewership. It's like a standard stadium, and then it's usually in the center, computers, PCs, where teams are playing against each other. The majority of esports takes place on desktops, gaming PCs, some laptops, but not so commonly. And then there's a few esports that are played on consoles like Xbox, PlayStation, GameCube. But you can think of it just like a basketball stadium, something like that. It's very similar.
So are there formalized league rules where you actually, when you play, you have to play in the same location? Or is this also something that can take place with remote play?
Yeah, it's all pretty much able to be done, and you can compete remotely. And that, to my mind, is a part of the beauty of esports. The barrier to entry and competition isn't sort of drawn by geographical lines. So anyone can play with anyone across the globe for the most part, which is just a really neat feature of esports. And then, yeah, I think that especially with COVID being here, esports have really been sort of thrust into the mainstream and accelerated in sort of an unprecedented way because of that exact feature. Right? With, at least in the scholastic space, traditional sports have been sort of off the table. You can't get together, you can't play soccer, you can't play football. People are turning to gaming, and that's something that's really caught people's attention as well. Here's something, it's competition, it's community, it's cooperation, and we don't need to be in the same room to do it.
Has the NCAA, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, begun to recognize? Is there a pathway? What's their connection to esports?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So they've been looking at it and are looking at it very seriously, but have thus far chosen to remain out of it and have chosen not to come in and govern the space. A big reason why is because the industry, at least the collegiate space, is still sort of in its infancy. It needs some more maturing. I wouldn't quite say it's the Wild West. The Wild West was 2-3 years ago. It's a little bit farther along than that. But I think they're waiting a couple more years before they step in, and they want to see how it develops. Also, there's a couple sort of issues that are a bit sticky with esports that I think play into that decision, namely name, image, and likeness. That's a big issue for the NCAA, with students being able to profit off their name, image, and likeness. In esports, they can do that. That's a huge part of the gaming industry, is streaming, being able to turn your stream into a profit. It's a profession for a lot of people. A lot of collegiate gamers have streams. And so that's a big piece of it as well, is where does the NCAA come in? And even in traditional athletics, the NCAA is beginning to sort of change their stance in several states on their policies there.
And so the NCAA is particularly well wired as a money machine. So can you talk a little bit about where the money comes from, the revenue model of esports? How do players, who's paying?
Yeah, that's try to think about how best to answer that question. The sort of vague answer is that everyone's paying a lot. I think one of the reasons it's such a hot topic for entrepreneurs or anyone is that money is flowing in by the truckload into esports in every imaginable form, just because that's where so many people, so many eyeballs are, and so many core demographics are. You know, kids as young as 7, 8 years old, all the way up to people in their 30s, 40s, 50s are there, and thus there's opportunity. But to answer that question a little bit more concretely, I think a good way to think about it is sports. Wherever there's money in sports, there's money in esports. So from sponsorship by endemic or non-endemic brands to being a professional player, to being a coach, to being a professional team, to being some sort of auxiliary brand or organization within the space that serves sort of some unique function. I mean, we were able to carve out our niche doing higher ed consulting around developing esports programs. So there's a lot of opportunity. There's also a lot of people trying to capitalize on that opportunity. So at least in the collegiate scene, the scholastic scene, in my opinion, there's a lot of saturation of organizations that aren't necessarily adding too much to the ecosystem as a whole. But whichever way you can think to carve out an opportunity, there's probably a way to do it if you bring sort of that business and entrepreneurial savvy and wherewithal to the table.
So we're talking about a combination of personal sponsorships. I'm a star player. I might have a co-branding or an advertising relationship with a technology company, a soda company, a sneaker company. Is it? I mean, it's just that basic advertising revenue generation model plus ticket sales, Twitch streaming. How does that all come into play?
Yeah, a lot of the traditional revenue models are in play. Just as Ronaldo gets paid by Nike to wear his cleats, Bjorkson or Double Lift or one of these famous esports players can get paid by Logitech or Razer to use their gear or equipment or rep their brand on his jersey. Same thing with professional teams. They might put a sponsorship logo on their jerseys or on their website. Same kind of transactions. So yeah, it operates pretty similarly. The big difference is where it comes to the monetization of streaming. And this isn't something that I have a ton of expertise in, but the streaming, that's usually done by individual players. They have their own stream. People watch them play, they create content, and they get paid through advertising and other monetization pathways through Twitch or whatever streaming platform they're on. Sometimes a professional team will have their own stream. They'll help their players grow their stream. So that's a big sort of financial component of it as well.
Are there leagues and team owners?
Yeah, definitely. What's a good example? So League of Legends, which is one of, if not the most popular esport right now. There's many professional teams competing in the LCS, which is their premier North American league. I don't know how many spots there are, but organizations like Team Liquid, Cloud9, 100 Thieves, super sort of modern professional lifestyle brands and professional teams, they have slots in that, and they spend a lot of money to get that franchise slot. Don't quote me on this, but I think the most recent purchase or sale of a spot was like 30 million for the spot. So yeah.
Wow. So with that kind of money rolling around, how do the universities benefit? I can't imagine this is just something nice they're doing for the students that doesn't fill their pockets a little bit. I don't want to sound cynical, far be it, but I'm just curious.
Sure. It depends on the institution. There definitely are a few schools who have that approach where they roll it out as something that falls under rec sports or student life, and maybe they sort of piece together the funding to throw some computers in an empty classroom, and that's their esports program. But the benefits, and this is what I spend a lot of my time in my work doing, is sort of educating senior administrators and C-suite level folks at the institution of what the benefits are. But most of the time they're viewing it from a enrollment and retention standpoint, the institutions are. So, if your prospective pool of students that you're trying to bring to the institution are all, not all, but many of them are gamers, then having an esports program and a place where they can come play, feel like they're part of a community, do something they're passionate about. Maybe there's some curricular tie-ins. They have, esports management minors and majors and certificates being rolled out. That's a huge draw. And when you're looking at 3 or 4 schools and one of them has esports and your favorite thing to do when you're not doing homework is gaming, then you're probably going to go there. So from the institutional standpoint, enrollment and retention are big ones. But also there's benefits like, invigorating campus culture. So tapping into creating some community and a space for students, and gamers, which is a constituency group that has historically been sort of pushed aside or not captured on campus. They sort of fall through the cracks. This is a way to engage that demographic. It can be really popular for just building community, ties into retention. It's a way of modernizing and innovating for the institution, making it relevant and bringing it sort of into the 21st century in a real way. Marketing, curricular opportunity, you can create majors, minors, as I said, but any way you spin it, there's benefits across the board for the students and for the school, which is why it's so hot in higher ed right now.
That makes sense.
Is there a gender dimension to esports? In other words, can men play against women?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not like gender divided like traditional sports are. Fun fact, the only traditional sport that I'm aware of that men and women play on an equal playing field would be the equestrian sports, esports as well. So there's no men's team and women's team.
You do get some of that. It's less black and white along gender lines. For the most part, it's co-ed, and it's interesting. Esports as an industry doesn't come without its demons, and I think tangential to that, sexism, misogyny, toxicity, online harassment, and bullying. These are serious issues that the industry in the scholastic space and the space generally are dealing with. And there's a little bit of nuance there, because when you talk about video games generally, you actually get almost an even distribution of men and women who play video games. When it comes to esports, it's a little bit skewed more heavily towards men. I think it's about 60-40. But there's a lot of really cool initiatives going on campuses. And I'll use UC Irvine as an example. They have a great diversity and inclusion and equity sort of initiative and thesis to their program. They make sure to have dedicated nights and they hold space for minority groups and make sure that everyone feels welcome and inclusive in their program. Everyone gets a chance to compete. So there's good work being done on that front. It does sometimes break down along gender lines, but for the most part, I think it's heading in the right direction. Yeah.
So if you were advising, just as by way of concluding here, if you were advising entrepreneurs, where would a small business, an entrepreneur, an app writer, where would you get started? What's your pathway in to find fortune in esports outside of actually being a player?
That is a really good question. My answer is going to be less about esports and more about the entrepreneur. I think that being true to your skill sets and your competencies and finding a way to make that work within an esports context is going to be your best bet. I think that there isn't a lot of money in the scholastic space. If you're looking to get into collegiate or high school, I would look at esports more generally. There's not a ton of money floating around in those spaces yet. But it really
By a guy
depends
who's in
on
that space, right?
yeah. And it right, exactly. But it really depends on, where you come in as an entrepreneur. If you're somebody who does sponsorships, or you're a marketer, or you're, I don't know, a branding agency, whatever, think along those lines in terms of how you might be able to drive value first and foremost in an industry like esports, and do your research, because there's a flood of organization and folks who come into the space who are undereducated, and the demographic, the communities within certain games and within esports can be very intense, very fickle at times. And if you don't come in and come correct, you can get ousted pretty quickly. So if you don't know what you're talking about, make sure you know what you're talking about, basically.
So it's a solid pool of consumers, if you're just looking at it from a sports marketing standpoint. But if you're gonna go in and pretend you know what's going on, you're going to be outed as an idiot right away. So tread carefully is what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
but also don't dismiss it. I think there's a good amount of dismissal over this, and I think once you start talking to business people and entrepreneurs about, well, that team sold for $30 million, all of a sudden, perhaps we should all pay a little bit more attention.
Yeah. Anytime $30 million is floated around in conversation, people tend to perk their ears up a little bit. Yeah.
Well, this has been a very informative time with you, Jesse. I mean, it's exciting that you're lucky to be at the dawn and the rise of a new industry. Mike?
Right on. I am better off as usual from watching somebody talk about stuff that I don't know about. Now it's so interesting what starts to open up and the opportunities that we see ahead. I'm not really a big regular sports guy. Maybe esports is far more fascinating to me. I think I'll go find out. So Jesse, thank you for taking the time to join us. I much appreciate it. Paul, thank you for sourcing another excellent guest. And thank you for watching another episode of Business in the Know. And we'll see you next time. Until then, let's keep meeting people, playing some sports online, meeting other people, making a couple of sales, and putting a few dollars in our wallet.